I remember that day so clearly, like it was yesterday. It was a Tuesday, one of those monotonous days where the paperwork seemed endless. I was at my desk, surrounded by piles of documents, my eyes aching from staring at the computer screen for too long. The office smelled of stale coffee, a scent that seemed to linger in the air and cling to everything it touched. I was lost in my thoughts when my phone lit up with a FaceTime call from Sophie. My heart lifted a little at the sight of her name. I assumed she was going to show me something fun from her trip, a new bracelet or a local snack she found amusing. Sophie had gone on a trip with my parents, my brother Mark, and her cousins. It was spring break, and the timing was perfect for her to join them on their sightseeing adventure out of state. I couldn't go with them. Work had me tied down, and flying wasn't an option for me. I hadn't flown in over a decade due to a severe phobia that made even the thought of boarding a plane unbearable. So I stayed behind, expecting nothing more than a few cheerful updates from Sophie. I answered the call, ready to see her smiling face, but what I saw instead was Sophie sitting on the edge of a hotel bed, looking exhausted. "Hey, Mom," she said softly. Her voice was so quiet, so unlike her usual cheerful tone. She asked me to promise not to freak out before telling me something, and of course, my heart sank. She turned the camera to show her leg propped up on a pillow, swollen and discolored. My stomach dropped at the sight. The skin was stretched tight and it looked all wrong. "I think I broke it," she said, and for a moment I couldn't process her words. I asked her what she meant, hoping I had misunderstood, but she explained that she had fallen the day before on some stairs at an old palace they visited. I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me as I listened to her recount the events. My parents and Mark had looked at her leg and decided it wasn't serious. They thought it was just bruising, she told me. I was stunned. They hadn't taken her for medical attention, hadn't sought help. Instead, they continued with their plans, and Sophie had walked for 3 hours with what she thought might be a broken leg. She said they told her she was overreacting, a familiar refrain in our family. They assured her she'd feel better after resting, but now, she said, the pain was worse. My mind was racing. Sophie was alone in a hotel room in another state, in pain, with a possibly broken leg. I felt paralyzed for a moment, staring at the screen, trying to think clearly. I told her not to move, that I would come to get her. She hesitated, knowing I would have to fly, but there was no other option. I had to be there for her. I hung up and immediately started searching for flights. There was one leaving in 90 minutes. Fear and logic took a back seat as I booked the ticket and began making calls. I tried reaching my parents, but their phones went to voicemail. I called Mark, and when he answered, his casual tone made my blood boil. I told him about Sophie, about how she couldn't walk, and his response was dismissive. He said she had always been sensitive, as if that excused their negligence. I never thought I'd be sitting here, speaking into a camera, sharing my life like this. But sometimes the weight of everything just builds up, and you need to let it out. So here I am, hoping that this can be a kind of release, a way to process everything that's been swirling inside me. It all started with that phone call. A call that felt like the last straw in a long line of straws that had been piling up for years. It was about my daughter, Sophie. She was hurt, and I wasn't there. I could hear it in Mark's voice, that dismissive tone I'd come to know so well. He was trying to brush it off, telling me it was probably just a sprain, but I knew better. I could feel it in my gut, that instinct that only a mother knows. She was in pain, and she needed me. I remember hanging up, feeling this surge of emotions, anger, frustration, guilt, all of it mixed together, pushing me into action. I grabbed my bag, shut my laptop, and practically ran down the hallway at work. My boss was startled when I burst into his office, but I didn't care. I told him it was a family emergency. He started to argue, reminding me that I had just been given an assignment, but I couldn't listen to him, not then. I walked out, booked a cab, and texted Sophie. I told her to stay in bed, not to move. Her reply was a simple heart emoji. And as small as that was, it spoke volumes. It reminded me of why I had to go, why I couldn't sit idly by and let her suffer. The ride to the airport was a blur. My mind was racing, bouncing between the past and the present. I could feel this irrational urge to turn back, to doubt myself. But I couldn't afford to do that. Not now, not when Sophie needed me. I ran through the airport, barely making it to the gate in time. I had no check bags, no change of clothes, just the determination that I wasn't going to let anyone dismiss my daughter any longer. I hate flying. It's something I've always struggled with. The fear, the anxiety, the memories of every turbulent flight I've ever endured. But in that moment, my fear of flying was nothing compared to the fear of what might happen if I didn't get to Sophie in time. Sitting on that plane, I was a bundle of nerves. The woman next to me was peacefully asleep, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I envied her calm, her ability to shut out the world and find peace. My mind, however, wouldn't let me rest. Every small bump, every slight turbulence sent my heart racing, but I forced myself to stay silent, to face the internal battle without letting it show. The voices in my head were relentless, telling me I was overreacting, being dramatic. It was a familiar refrain, one that had been drilled into me since childhood. My mother's voice was particularly loud, reminding me of all the times she said I needed to grow out of my fears. I hadn't flown in over a decade, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't bear the anxiety it brought. Airports were a trigger, a reminder of all the flights that had gone wrong, of all the times I felt out of control. Even as a child, I'd been terrified of flying. I remember one flight when I was 10, gripping the tray table with white knuckles, tears streaming down my face. Mark thought it was hilarious, filming the whole thing on his dad's camcorder. Years later, he added sound effects and played it for the family at Thanksgiving. Everyone laughed, but I was still just a child, humiliated and scared. Mark and I were so different. He was the golden child, always confident and energetic, the center of attention at every family gathering. I was the opposite, quiet and reserved, always on the sidelines. My allergies, my fears, my sensitivities, they were all seen as weaknesses, as ploys for attention. If I cried, it was fake. If I was scared, it was embarrassing. I learned early on to keep my emotions in check, to hide my fears and pretend I was okay. But inside, I was always struggling, always trying to prove that I wasn't just being dramatic. Mark could sprain a pinky and be treated like a hero, while I was told to toughen up. The rules were different for him, and they always had been. I stopped talking much as I grew up, realizing that no matter what I said, it would be dismissed. I watched, I learned, and I stopped reacting. But now, with Sophie, I couldn't be silent anymore. I had to be there for her, to show her that she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to be dismissed like I was. That thought kept me going, kept me pushing through my fears, all the way to her side. I remember the day I decided to study law. It was a turning point for me. People around me couldn't quite grasp why someone like me, who they perceived as too sensitive or too reactive, would choose such an intense field. But I wasn't delicate. I was determined. My past experiences taught me the importance of being believed, of having evidence and logic on my side. I wanted to build a career around truth, a truth that stands on its own without needing anyone's approval. I thought if I could succeed in this, my parents would see me differently, as someone strong, capable, worthy of respect. But even after all my achievements, they still seemed to see me as fragile, like I might break down any moment. It's frustrating, but I've come to accept it. Then Sophie came into my life, my beautiful daughter, perfect from the moment she was born. She was gentle and thoughtful, with this deep expression that seemed to understand the world's chaos and wanted to mend it with kindness. She reminded me so much of myself. From the beginning, I promised I'd protect her from the same misunderstandings and judgments I faced. I stood up for her, especially when my dad would make jokes, calling her a drama queen. I wouldn't let it go unnoticed. I defended her when others said she was too emotional, while praising kids like Haley for being spirited. I was vigilant, making sure Sophie knew she was valued and understood. But raising a child is complicated. They sense more than we realize. They notice the pauses, the unsaid words, and they start to internalize those feelings, just as I did when I was young. So when Sophie asked to go on a trip with my parents, Mark, Haley, and Ben, I was torn. I wanted her to have that experience, to bond with her cousins, but the thought of flying made me anxious. Air travel isn't just physically uncomfortable for me, it messes with my mind. I've tried everything, therapy, exposure therapy, even medication, but nothing works. Sophie knows this. It's an unspoken rule in our home that Mom doesn't fly. She pleaded with me, promising to call every night, and my mom reassured me they'd take good care of her. Mark chimed in, promising to watch over her. Haley was thrilled about the trip. Then they asked if I could help cover the cost of Haley and Ben's extra plane tickets, since they'd be looking after Sophie. It was presented as if they were doing me a favor, as if I should be grateful. I sent the money, packed Sophie's suitcase with everything she'd need, including her allergy meds and a charger, and kissed her goodbye. As I waved, I forced a smile, trying to ignore the unease in my heart. I wanted to believe my parents had changed, that they'd matured, that they'd finally see Sophie as her own person and not a reflection of the daughter they never fully understood. The flight was rough. I sat there gripping the armrest, unable to shake the image of Sophie sitting on a hotel bed, trying not to cry. She'd tell me her leg hurt more now, that she'd fallen the day before, that they made her walk for hours despite her pain, telling her she was fine. She didn't want to ruin the trip. That's what she'd say, and it broke me because I know she got that from me. I never said it out loud, but I lived it. I spent my childhood pretending everything was okay, just to keep peace with people who didn't truly care. I've tried to break that cycle in every way I could, but I failed in the most important moment. I let her go with them. I trusted them to take care of her, and they didn't. As the plane began to descend, I felt my stomach knot up. I leaned back, trying to breathe. Not fully, just enough. They think I'm overreacting, that I'll arrive and cause a scene. But they're wrong. This isn't a scene. It's a boundary. I didn't avoid flying because I was scared. I stayed grounded because I couldn't handle what flying revealed about them. But for Sophie, I'd face any fear, even fly through my worst nightmares, if it meant keeping her safe. When I arrived at the hotel, I was struggling to breathe, as if the air itself was heavy with everything I was about to face. I had imagined all sorts of scenarios in my head. Maybe I'd find a sorrowful scene, with my parents asking for forgiveness. But I never expected Sophie to open the door herself. She stood there looking pale, still in her pajamas, her hair a tangled mess as if it hadn't been brushed in days. She leaned against the doorframe, using it for support. Her eyes widened as she whispered, "You actually came." That hit me hard. It wasn't a thank you or a plea for help, just pure surprise. Like she didn't believe I would really come. Like I was someone who made promises but never followed through. I reached forward and wrapped my arms around her gently, whispering, "Of course I came. You're the only reason I'd get on a plane." Then, trying to lighten the moment, I added, "Please don't ever make me do it again." She let out a small laugh, and for a moment, the heaviness lifted. But we had to move. I told her it was time to get her leg checked before it started doing something odd, like glowing or talking to us. It took us a while to get her shoes on. Half the time was spent debating whether she needed both shoes. She didn't. One stayed off because her foot looked like it had swallowed a baseball. As I tied the laces, I asked without thinking, "So how did it happen exactly?" "Stairs, right?" I was expecting her to say she tripped or something about slippery shoes. Instead, she went silent. "It wasn't really a fall," she finally said, almost hesitantly. "He pushed me as a joke." I looked up slowly, trying to process what she had just said. She continued, "He didn't mean to. I was taking a picture and he shoved me like he does all the time, but I missed a step and fell. They all saw it. My heart sank as she nodded, confirming it. Grandma said she was being dramatic. Mark told her to stop crying because she was scaring the tourists. Grandpa asked if she had twisted it before the trip. I asked why she hadn't told me all this on the phone. She hesitated before admitting that she thought it would just go away and didn't want to cause trouble for Ben. I stood up, feeling a rush of anger. Sophie, someone pushes you down the stairs, and your leg swells up like that. You don't protect them, not even if they're family. Especially if they're family. She looked away, avoiding my eyes. I told her that when the hospital staff asked what happened, she needed to tell the truth, the whole truth, no edits. She nodded quietly, and we finally made our way out. At the hospital, they took us in quickly, perhaps because I mentioned I thought her leg might be broken, or maybe because of the look I gave the clipboard, as if it had personally wronged me. The nurse went through the usual questions about pain levels, symptoms, allergies, and then asked how it happened. Sophie glanced at me once, then straightened up and said, "My cousin pushed me as a joke. I fell down some stairs." She stated it like a simple fact, not a sob story, just the plain truth. The nurse's face remained neutral, but her pen scribbled faster. When the x-ray came back, it confirmed what I feared. A tibia fracture, non-displaced, but definitely broken. The doctor said she was lucky it hadn't shifted, if she'd walked much more on it. He didn't finish the sentence, but I silently completed it in my head with a list of dreadful possibilities, each one fueling a quiet rage inside me. After the doctor left, I turned to Sophie and asked for the full story, from start to finish. She began to talk, recounting how after the fall she begged to go to the hospital. They told her there was no time. It was a day for a walking tour, and the tickets were non-refundable. They said she could use some ice at the end of the day. So she walked for 3 hours on that leg. The next morning, when she asked again, they told her if she was really in pain, she could stay at the hotel, but they had a winery tour booked and someone had to watch the kids. Then they left her alone. I remember the moment it all clicked for me, when everything came crashing down like a tidal wave. I was standing there, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me, and I realized that this wasn't just about what was happening to my daughter. It was a continuation of something far older, something that I had lived through myself. I had been called a drama queen so many times in my life, told I was overreacting, that my fears were unfounded. I had learned to swallow my words, to keep quiet, because that was easier for everyone else. But now, seeing the same pattern play out with my daughter, I knew I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't let them silence her the way they tried to silence me. It was like history repeating itself, and this time I was determined to stop it. I remember calling my parents. I was shaking, not with fear, but with anger. I needed them to understand that this was serious, that my daughter was hurt, and that it wasn't just an accident. My dad picked up, and I could tell from his tone that he wasn't really worried about her. He just wanted to know what I knew. I told him she had a fracture, that a doctor had confirmed it. He brushed it off, said it didn't look that bad, that Ben was just playing around. But I knew what I had seen. I knew that she hadn't just tripped. I told him I was pressing charges, and that's when I got a reaction. He couldn't believe I would take it that far, drag the family into court. But this wasn't just a little accident. This was about protecting my daughter, about being the mother she needed me to be. Back in the room, Sophie looked at me, her eyes wide and questioning. She asked if it was Grandpa on the phone, and I nodded. I told her he thought I was being irrational, and she laughed, a real laugh that made my heart ache, with both relief and pain. That's when I knew I had to take action. I opened my phone, went to my notes app, and started typing. Request legal consultation. Medical neglect possible. Child endangerment. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about making sure Sophie knew deep down that no one could hurt her without facing the consequences. Not even family. Especially not family. That night, I barely slept. It wasn't the adrenaline or the anger. It was my mind, racing with plans and possibilities. timelines, flights, court filings. A small voice in my head kept asking if I really wanted to take my own parents to court. But I knew the answer. Yes, I did. Not because I wanted revenge for myself, but because of Sophie, because of the way her voice cracked when she said she didn't want to start drama, as if what happened to her was somehow her fault. We couldn't let things like that slide anymore. A few days later, I got the footage. It was like a punch to the gut, watching it unfold. There she was, my daughter, standing on the tourist stairs, smiling for the camera, and then Ben, charging up behind her, shoving her elbow. She flailed, slipped, and fell out of frame. But the worst part was seeing the adults in the background, my parents among them, just standing there, not moving, not reacting, as if it wasn't real, as if she wasn't real. I sent the video to my lawyer and she responded with a thumbs up. It was all I needed to know we were moving forward. Filing the case meant going back, facing everything head-on, court appearances, paperwork, interviews. It meant flying back and forth, something that used to terrify me. But I looked at Sophie and she gave me strength. She asked if I was flying again, and I nodded. I wasn't doing it willingly, but I wasn't paralyzed by fear anymore either. It was like once you face something you thought you couldn't survive, it changes you. It was like therapy, but more intense. Maternal rage, it turns out, is a powerful motivator. It was stronger than my fear of crashing. When we got home, the real battle began. Mark was the first to confront me, showing up at my door with that familiar smugness. He couldn't believe I was going through with this, that I was tearing the family apart. But I knew this wasn't about him or even about me. It was about Sophie and making sure she knew she was worth fighting for. I didn't think it would come to this, sitting here, talking to a camera, spilling my life out for everyone to see. But I guess it's time. I'm Erica, and I need to tell you about the moment everything changed for me, the moment I stopped flinching and started fighting back. It wasn't easy, and it cost me more than I ever thought it would. But I had to do it. For my daughter. For Sophie. I never imagined I'd have to choose between my family and what was right. It sounds dramatic, I know. But that's where I found myself. It all started with a phone call, one of those moments that just shatters your world. Sophie had been on a trip with my parents and my brother Mark. I thought she'd be safe, that they'd take care of her like they always promised. But when I picked up the phone and heard Sophie's voice, I knew something was wrong. She was trying to be brave, but I could hear it in her voice. She was scared. She told me she'd fallen and hurt her leg, but it was more than just a fall. They'd left her alone, in pain, and just walked away. It was like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what to do at first. I was furious and heartbroken all at once. How could they just leave her like that? A child with a broken leg, in a hotel room, alone. But I knew I had to stay calm. I had to be there for Sophie. I went to get her as fast as I could. When I saw her, my heart broke all over again. She was trying so hard to be strong, to pretend it didn't hurt as much as it did, but I could see it in her eyes. She was in pain and she was scared. I promised her then and there that I'd make it right, that I'd make sure they couldn't hurt her again. When I confronted my parents, I thought maybe they'd understand. Maybe they'd see how wrong it was, what they'd done. But they didn't. My mom tried to guilt me into dropping it. She said we were family, that you don't take family to court. My dad tried to make it all go away with a promise that we could just move on. But I couldn't. I couldn't just let it go. They made Sophie walk on that broken leg for 3 hours. They saw her fall and laughed at her pain. I told them I wasn't letting it go. Not this time. The fallout was immediate. They were angry, of course, but they didn't stop there. The calls started pouring in, from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all asking me to drop it, to think about the family. Uncle Marty, who hadn't called since 2006, was suddenly interested in our lives again. They all tried to make me feel guilty, to make me doubt myself, but I knew what was right. So I showed them the truth. I shared the footage, the x-rays, the proof of what had happened. At first, they didn't want to believe it, but eventually they couldn't ignore it anymore. The calls started to fade as the reality set in. I had to take it to court. I didn't want to, but I had to. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure Sophie was safe, about making sure they couldn't do this to anyone else. The courtroom wasn't like the movies. There were no dramatic moments, just a tired judge and some lawyers exchanging papers. But the verdict was clear: child endangerment, medical neglect, failure to report injury. My parents and Mark were all charged. No jail time, but the fines were harsh, the kind that make your heart race when you see the number. Mark lost his job. Schools don't want a PE teacher with a child endangerment charge. They had to move, downsize to a smaller place in a worse neighborhood. Mom called it temporary, but I heard they were struggling to pay rent. They never asked me for help. They didn't have to. I'd already stopped supporting them financially. I closed the account, stopped the gifts. They were on their own now.